Suspended Secretary-General Ace Magashule must apologise in public for his perceived defiant behaviour over the past week, including an attempt to suspend the president of the ANC without a mandate. Failure to do so will result in more disciplinary action, he said. To speak a little bit more about this and the ramifications of what happened this weekend, political analyst Professor Tinyiko Maluleke joins me now on Zoom. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. So, let's just first start with the importance of kicking out the Secretary-General of the virtual meeting. And now what the President says is a public apology that is required of him.
Well, I think his kicking out was a necessary, if you want, signal that needed to be sent to him, because all through the week, he had been heard insisting that he was still the General Secretary or Secretary-General of the ANC, and that he was not going to obey the suspension, and had defied it in more ways than just that, because he also gave an interview, among other things, which is something that he wasn't allowed to do. So I think it was important for the NEC to send a message to him that this is not acceptable, that his suspension is still valid.
And I want to talk about that. What you're saying is the need to give an interview also goes hand in hand with the impression by some that he's allowed to do so because he has launched an appeal and therefore is unsuspended. So talk to me about the differences of interpretation on Section 25.43 and 25.45 of the Constitution of the ANC on suspension, and why do these contradictions arise?
Yeah, that baffles me a little bit, Tsepiso, to be honest with you. That whole area, I think the ANC would be best positioned to clarify them. Safe to say that my understanding, I mean, you will note that the president was, in his closing remarks, was completely silent about the status of a suspended person. Didn't even go there, didn't even entertain that discussion at all. Simply assumed that if you are suspended, and you stay there, as it were, because there is a school of thought that says there's no room for appeal when one is suspended in terms of a particular section of the Constitution of the ANC, and the feeling is that this is the case as far as people asked to step aside is concerned. It's probably a matter that will be ventilated in court should this matter go to court.
But Prof, it comes to another point that others have raised, that once the organization is ruled through the courts, as has been the concern when there was a legal interpretation or advice to be given on the understanding of the resolution taken at the elective Congress on this issue of a step aside. So why is it that the very constitution of the party is not understood in tandem by the members? Does the ANC run into trouble in this case that it'll reach a point where the legalese and the various interpretation will then govern what happens in the party?
Well, the ANC has from time to time subjected itself to legal process, not always willingly, but because members have taken it there. And it seems in this case it might happen. But I think it's important that we don't get bogged down at this point of the proceedings, as it were, with legalese, because clearly what is at issue here is not merely whether who is on the side of the Constitution, but also the question of corruption, and a party that is mired in it and is trying to get itself out of it.
Okay, so then let's talk about some of those fundamental issues, Professor Maluleke. There's the issue of Morogoro. It seems to rear its head every time there are some principial arguments or disagreements within the party. Why is that moment such a watershed moment that it still rules what happens in the ANC presently and in the future?
Well, you're talking about the emergence of factions and the emergence of splinter groups, I suppose. Morogoro is, of course, landmark in that sense, but we don't even have to go to Morogoro. You can go back to 2007, the near split that happened. You could argue that a split happened in 2007 when COPE was formed. So the ANC has to continue refining and honing its ability to deal with differences of vision and opinion and differences of interpretation of its mandate.
Okay. So, Prof, allow me to interrupt you and say that it's not necessarily I who believe that, but it's members of the ANC who keep on bringing up Morogoro. Is it because it's instructive of how the party has in the past managed to deal with these divisive issues that have created fissures so large that they've led to a split, or some party members being, thrown out of the party? And is it also instructive of how, if a split is in the offing, the party should then deal with that?
Well, sometimes I wish we didn't rely only on Morogoro, that we went a little bit further back into the history of the ANC, because there is a reason why the ANC is called a broad church. It comes from the understanding that the ANC has always been able to deal with diverse opinion in its ranks, and to be able to leverage people from different sections of society, but also from different ideological backgrounds. That is at the heart of who the ANC is. So Morogoro is probably an example of an extreme case. And often we tend to use extremes as norms, as it were. There are other ways in which the ANC has dealt with differences and managed.
Prof, it emerged that at the weekend, the Premier of Limpopo, Stan Chipa Matabata, suggested that a retreat might help solve the impasse that the party finds itself within. Do you think that that would be sufficient to deal with these ideological differences? And if there is a split within the party, just how wide would it be?
I think that suggestion from Matabate is a sign of how desperate the situation is and how much the party would like to avoid. Even the findings, if you like, against Magashule, they are not really, it's not an expulsion that has come out. And you can see attempts, even at this stage, to keep the ANC together. And I think that proposal for a retreat is one such desperate attempt to do that. The question is whether the ANC can be kept together in unity under any circumstances, or whether the unity needs to be defined more purposefully than has been the case before. Okay. So that it's not just unity for the sake of unity, but it's unity for a purpose. And what is that purpose? I think is perhaps what the retreat will go and flesh out.
And I'd imagine that a proper prognosis of some of the deeper lying issues would be at the center of that. There have been accusations that there has been an uneven-handedness in dealing with this issue of step aside and those who are perceived to be targeted. Is there a basis for that accusation? And do you think that the so-called Magashule camp then have something to hold on to say that he is being targeted?
Well, I think it's possible to argue if you are standing on his side of the fence. If I get stopped by the traffic police, I can also argue that I'm being targeted, especially on a busy road where other people are driving faster than I am. So that argument is possible, but it doesn't really deal with the issue. The issue is the ANC has to root out the impression that it has become home to corruption. And it has to start somewhere. And it now has a process in place. It has a resolution. It has refined it and cascaded it down to an implementable proposition. And it's begun to do that. And I don't know that it's good enough for people simply to argue that they are being targeted. Of course, the step aside can't be the be-all and end-all. The ANC will have to take itself to the next phase and the next level in terms of raising the bar, in terms of the ethical conduct of its leaders in particular, and the ethical conduct of the entire movement, not just individuals in it.
All right. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. Really appreciate it. Professor Tinyiko Maluleke, political analyst on the outcome of the weekend. NEC was said to be quite a spirited one, and of course the ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa delivering the outcome earlier on, saying that the Secretary-General will have to issue a public apology to the structures of the ANC for his perceived defiant behaviour this weekend, which was deemed to be without mandate.